양지 첨부소던 힘이 정zon은 모놈 첨부를 가져다 바크르다는 용산도 실무도 돈바 투지잖아 기숑살 내친로서는 이제 동선자고 투지션을 일하면 지면 편소자락소라는 공지 또반포로 신지로
The answer past profound and wonderful Dharma's difficulty encountering billions of aeons. I now see it here to receive it and uphold it, about to fathom its true meaning, to liberate all beings, thus generate the supreme bodhicitta. Now let us begin and continue our class on the wish-fulfilling treasury that is composed by omniscient Longchenpa. Currently, we are studying the chapter on how to rely on spiritual teacher. Previously, we have already covered the characteristics and qualities of qualified teacher, where it says that the kinds of teacher who fulfill the 6 qualities are the teachers that's worthy to be relied upon. And then we learned about why we need to rely on the teacher, what's the meaning of it. So we studied that the teacher is the protector that could save you from all kinds of fears, and the supreme refuge place, as well as the meritorious field where you can accumulate merits. Also, the teacher bestow us the wisdom eye that could see what to adopt and what to reject. Another aspect is that from the long run, the teacher would definitely bring us great benefits. These are the 6 aspects in terms of the textual outline. Today we will talk about the reason of relying on the teacher is to increase our meritorious qualities, without which it will be very difficult for us. Let's look at the shloka. It says that there is nothing else that can perfect the meritorious qualities other than relying on a teacher. In order to flourish with the meritorious qualities of the beginning, middle, and the end, one shall rely on a teacher with reverence. In order to delight the teacher while relying on the teacher, which would bring us the result of perfecting our qualities, perfecting our merits, there is nothing else can perfect those meritorious qualities other than relying on a teacher. This is one aspect. And then there's another, is that at the beginning, middle, and end, there are 3 aspects of the qualities that could lead to liberation can also be obtained by relying on a teacher. Anyone in this world, even if it's a very foolish one, at the time of relying on a teacher, then the merits and the wonderful qualities of the teacher would naturally be obtained by the students. This is taught in many of the sutras and shastras, where it says that the teacher is the source of all the meritorious qualities. According to the Agana Abhidharma Sutra, the Shastra, it says that if one were to have doubts, and by relying on a qualified spiritual teacher, the doubts can result in the transformation into the right view with certainty. If not, if this person, for example, not willing to rely on a teacher, then the doubts would slowly transform into the wrong view with certainty. This is quite accurate, because if a person were to have all kinds of doubts at the time of encountering a qualified teacher, a good teacher, and it would provide the opportunity for this person to contemplate and to study, and slowly all of those doubts would lead and guide this person to develop the right view. Without relying on a teacher, then this person's doubts would be accumulated into wrong views in his or her mind stream. So at the time of entering into the path of liberation, at the time of seeking for liberation, it is crucial for us to relying on the spiritual teacher. And while we're on the path, there are all kinds of obstacles, such as heterodoxy, heterodox obstacles and heterodox views and obstacles and dangerous diversions on the path. Without relying on the teacher, we will not be able to overcome all of them. So the teacher is definitely extremely necessary. According to the Sutra of Right Mindfulness, it says that relying on the teacher is the foremost out of everything. If one were to attain liberation from birth and death. Also, in the auspicious biography where it says that all the qualities of the bodhisattvas derived from the spiritual teacher. According to the unfathomable sacred sutra, it also says that the bodhisattvas shall rely on the teacher so that one could perfect all the meritorious dharmas. According to the 10 wheels of the Kshitigarbha Sutra, it says that one should contemplate that by serving the teacher, one would be able to obtain all the unfathomable meritorious dharmas. According to the Treasury Sutra of the Bodhisattvas, where it says that if one were to enter into the teachings of the spiritual teacher, then one would be able to uphold the hundreds and thousands of kotis of unspeakable merits. In the Mahaparinirvana Sutra, it says that if we were to rely on a spiritual teacher, then one would be able to completely understand the 12 volumes of sutras, the 12 categories of sutras. If not rely on a spiritual teacher, if simply one want to rely on his or her own wisdom to gain the understanding of everything, that is extremely rare. I believe everyone who's sitting here, you should understand it by making observation of your own experience. I don't dare to say that I have attained the perfect meritorious qualities, but compared to the first day that I arrived in Larongar, to now that I've been here for so many years, in terms of my advancement and development from the Sutrayana teachings, the Vajrayana teachings, the Dharma teachings of the three yanas, I think I've gained lots of development and benefits. At the beginning, when I just came here, I had lots of wrong views and lots of ignorant thinkings. And now when I think of it, I really think that my thoughts, the way I used to think was quite laughable. But I used to be quite arrogant at the same time, not knowing anything. It was only through relying on those spiritual teachers which brought this change day by day. And that's how I developed. If we never encountered a spiritual teacher, or even worse, if we were to encounter some negative influence who tells us that do not rely on a spiritual teacher, do not rely on them, those are all frauds and charlatans. And on top of those kinds of influence, if we don't have any ability to make observations for ourselves, then we would agree to them blindly, saying that, oh, indeed, all of those so-called spiritual teachers and spiritual friends are simply frauds and charlatans. So maybe it would be the best for us to truly engage in contemplation and study so that we would be able to make observations properly as well. Anyhow, I think people with wisdom, they would definitely think by themselves. They are independent thinkers. By relying on a teacher is extremely important. If not, rather encountering some negative and bad influence, people could end up to become quite pitiful. There's a sutra called Dogs with Rabies Sutra. I think it's translated by Zhi Qian, and it's rather quite short. It has only one volume. it says that if we had never encountered a true spiritual friend, rather encountered or under the influence of the negative people, which later lead us to break some of the precepts and vows. And later, when we encounter genuine spiritual teacher, qualified spiritual teacher, that's the time we can retake and re-uphold those vows and precepts again. There are people who probably would have lots of doubts during the study of Buddhism. It is sometimes at the beginning of the path, when people don't have the ability to see who is the genuine teacher or not, and then already received the vows or even empowerments, what do? Well, whatever happened before, you don't have to do anything about them now, but at least from now on, since you've already encountered a genuine spiritual teacher, you can retake those precepts and those vows. This is a sutra that you can reference. You can find the reference and the evidence for such kind of activities. Nowadays, it's very difficult to find teacher with pure intention to benefit beings. Rather, lots of people would seek for fame and profit. So it's quite important to find a spiritual teacher who's content and who's not seeking for those. And then the sixth one, where it says that in the Dark Age, no one other than the compassionate teacher can guide me. For such a reason, I would revere such teacher more so than the Buddha. It's very difficult to find a genuine teacher, find a teacher with great compassion and wisdom. Even if the Buddha were to manifest himself in front of us to benefit sentient beings, the time has already changed and there is such degeneration in all different aspects. It would be extremely difficult for people to even rely on such kind of a teacher. So, as someone who's treading on the path, if we can find a true spiritual teacher who want to benefit sentient beings, we should revere on that teacher wholeheartedly, even more so than we revere the Buddha. Because a true, genuine spiritual teacher is so difficult to find in this world. Nowadays, what is very popular is not the true spiritual teacher, rather are the influencers, all of those successful CEOs, entrepreneurs. But when we encounter people who truly have bodhicitta in their mind stream and pure precepts in their mind stream, it is extremely difficult to find them, and it is extremely difficult to recognize them. That is why some of the tantras would say that the teacher is equivalent to all the Buddhas, and the teacher surpassed that of all the Buddhas. In the Tantra, it also says that the supreme treasury of the meritorious qualities, to such a teacher I pay homage. In the past, when during the time of the Buddha, he would use all kinds of ways to tame sentient beings. And when the Buddha passed into parinirvana, after the Buddha's passing, the various arhats, great Banditas, with their various activities, such as compile all the teachings of the Buddha, at the same time creating all kinds of shastras to make the commentaries and composing those shastras. Also, the activities such as Shariputra, Madhgalyayana, and the Arhats, including the two noble ones and 6 ornaments, and then all the great spiritual teachers whom truly uphold the teachings of the Buddha, whom truly uphold the activities of the Buddha to benefit sentient beings. The Parinirvana Sutra says that, Ananda, do not be saddened. In the future times, I will manifest as spiritual teachers to benefit sentient beings like you. In the Sutra of Great Drum, also some of the tantras, some of the Chinese esoteric teachings, it says that the great teachers, all the gurus indeed are quite wonderful because they are the ones who can truly lead us onto the path of liberation. It is only through the guidance of the teacher we can do so. In the Avatamsaka Sutra, the teacher is compared to the first son of the Chakravartin, the parents, the acharyas, the doctor that could cure you. And there are many examples that expound such. In the Tantra of the collection of sacred meaning as well as the Tantra of Chakra Sambhara stated such very clearly that we definitely all need to rely on a qualified spiritual teacher. Without such, we will not be able to obtain true merits and qualities. And if we can rely on a spiritual teacher, then we will be able to attain the unfathomable kinds of merits. Not just us, even the great bodhisattvas expounds the various qualities of the spiritual teacher. So whenever we have the opportunity to rely on the spiritual teacher, we definitely should do so. If we don't see the qualities being met, then it would be best not to rely on those teachers who are not qualified. However, the key is that after you already decided to rely on a teacher, and after you already rely on a teacher, under whatever circumstances, you should do so properly. So over here, it talks about the reasons of relying on the spiritual teacher through the 6 aspects. Now we are going to look at how to rely on the teachers, which has 2 aspects. The first one is actual explanation and then the merit. In the actual explanation, first talks about to find and seek the qualified spiritual teacher and then rely on such teacher. In the next one, it talks about to delight such teacher and to rely on this teacher. So it has 2 aspects. And then let's look at the first one. It says that a teacher who is endowed with supreme qualities, one shall follow wherever you would reside, filled with faith and veneration.
就我们这个具有这个前面已经讲了，就是具德的这个善知识啊，就是具有这个真正的这个这种德相的
qualified spiritual teacher
德相的善知识的话呢，
who's endowed with all the supreme qualities.
善知识的话呢，那就是看看那个就是
In terms of the supreme qualities, how can you make such observation? First of all, you need to look at the others' feedback, the feedback from great masters, the feedback from the Sangha and from the worldly beings. And then also, you need to make observation from your wisdom, whether this teacher has great qualities. It would not be appropriate for you to make those observations after you relied on this teacher. You should really spend some time to get to know this teacher first, and to look at how other people would give feedback on this particular teacher. On top of that, you need to make observation for yourselves. I've said this many times that you can listen to my class or not. It doesn't really matter to me. But after you have already listened to my class and then you want to abandon this kind of connection, then that is not a proper way of relying on teacher. While you're already here, we have so many Khenpos and Khenmos. You should be able to at least find one qualified teacher to follow over here. Otherwise, what's the point of you staying here? Now, the supreme teacher that is well endowed, wherever he resides, you should try your very best to find him or her and seek for this teacher. This finding and following the teacher at all times, it is not to say that whatever the teacher does and wherever the teacher is, you should mimic and physically follow this teacher. For example, the teacher stands up and you should stand up, and the teacher goes to the bathroom, you also follows the teacher to the bathroom. It doesn't mean that. The following the spiritual teacher, relying on spiritual teacher, means that while you carry your body, speech, and mind with great veneration and devotion and respect and faith, to rely on the teacher, to seek for the Dharma that the teacher would give you, and then carry out those teachings. There's one thing you need to be aware at the beginning is not to break the auspicious dependent arising, not to break the auspicious connections that you have. For example, to not pretend that you're so wonderful and do not act so arrogantly in front of the teacher and then start a debate without any respect with the teacher or to the teacher. Also, if your teacher is a great, accomplished one, maybe their activities and their actions and their speech would be a little bit different. And if you were to make judgment of the teacher's activities and actions, then that's a sign sometimes that you've already destroyed the dependent arising. There are people who would say that, oh, I'm here to see you because Manjushri told me to see you. Then the teacher would very easily to see that, oh, you're just such a big liar. If you can speak to Manjushri, then you can rely on Manjushri as your teacher. Why to come to see me? You need to be aware that the first impression is indeed quite important. Look at Milarepa, for example. When he heard of the name of Marpalotawa, right away, a deep faith arose in his mind, and he knew that he had to rely on this teacher. But I think some people are too ardent. Sometimes it seems that they are more devoted and faithful than Milarepa. However, with time, their true mind would be reviewed. What Tibetans would say is that the hatchlings of the crow would get darker and darker, because it is said that the hatchlings were not that dark at the beginning. Similarly, there are people at the beginning, maybe they're very ardent and have great devotion, but slowly the true character would reveal, and they would lose faith and lose respect to the teacher and to the Sangha, and got worse and worse. I'm not speaking that within the ultimate truth, because in ultimate truth, everything is without elaboration, and everyone indeed has Tathagata Garbha. But people sometimes, their temporary merit and temporary fruition that matured from their past merit would lead to a little bit of faith and a little bit of renunciation. But those are not very reliable. Without ongoing merits, it seems that they would get worse and worse on the path. So at the time of relying on a spiritual teacher, it would be the best to rely on a teacher genuinely and be aware of the activities that could potentially break the auspicious connections. There are lots of those auspicious connections between students and teachers. But usually we heard so much of those stories of the great Tertons and how they would relate to their students. And they would say sometimes, because of the students' inauspicious activity, it really destroyed the auspicious coincidence. Sometimes the tokus are true, and sometimes they're simply charlatans. Then they would use that as excuse. But what I really want to point out is that there are the importance of the dependent or auspicious dependent arising and the auspicious connections. So we need to be aware of that. Otherwise, we could lose those opportunities to relate to the spiritual teacher. As it is stated in the Avatamsaka Sutra, you need to seek for the spiritual teacher tirelessly and never part from such a spiritual teacher, whatever happens. While relying on the spiritual teacher, he or she may exhibit all kinds of skillful means to tame you. You need to find the spiritual teacher with great compassion, also with great wisdom. Well, seeking for this teacher and following this teacher, as I stated, is not just about physically following it. It is rather whenever you see him, I think whenever you constantly seek for this physical meetings with the teacher, some teachers would feel quite jaded and tired about that, because the blessings of the teacher doesn't necessarily mean that you have to meet them in person. It is the blessings in the mind stream. So you have to be very skillful at relying on the spiritual teacher so that whatever you do would delight the teacher as well. My personal example or my personal experience from such is that because I relied on Pongtsog Rinpoche and a few other teachers, I've written down lots of the things in the autobiography. I first came to Larungar back in 1985. Maybe less than 6 months after I arrived at Larungar, I accompanied Pongtsog Rinpoche to the 72 monasteries in Dawu County. I've wrote those experiences down in my journal, but I couldn't find it. Otherwise, I think the autobiography would have been much more extensive. Anyhow, my point is that sometimes, from my personal experience at least, by relying on spiritual teacher, it is not to require the spiritual teacher to do things according to your own standard. Sometimes I think the disciples nowadays have too much of their own requirement and references that's imposed on the teacher. You should eat this cookie, you should not eat this cookie, and some of them don't really have a good attitude when they are making such requirements to the teacher. But that is not good. Therefore, over here it says that wherever we are, whatever we do, we should make the spiritual teacher feel delighted and pleasant with our behavior. Because by seeking for the Supreme Bodhi, we have to make the aspiration of bodhicitta and then seek and find the spiritual teacher. After the spiritual teacher is found, we need to rely on the spiritual teacher tirelessly. According to Avatamsaka Sutra, it says that the bodhisattvas whom are tamed and accepted by the spiritual teachers will not fall into the 3 lower realms. This is quite important. As you may know, during the Cultural Revolution, there are lots of people whom would rather endure all the tortures than giving up and abandon their spiritual teacher. That is the great strength people had back then. According to the Sutra of the Ratna Raja, it says that there was once a bodhisattva whom went through lots of hardship in order to receive the oral transmission of the 6 syllables mantra. Also, we've studied the biography of how the bodhisattva often sobbing, whom seeked the Dharma teaching. Lots of those stories, such as how in the Sutra of the Wise and the Fool, where a king whom would put 1,000 wicks on his body and lit them up to seek for the teaching of the Prajnaparamita. So for each of us, we need to make the resolution that at the time of relying on the teacher, whatever we need to go through and endure, we can accept it, and we will definitely carry out our proper activities according to the Dharma teaching. This is quite crucial. If we can do that, then we would indeed receive the secret teachings of the teacher, because the teacher's secret teachings are very difficult for us to fathom, since the teachers need to tame different sentient beings and with different dispositions. Therefore, their actions, their behaviors, their speech have many levels of secrets. It is necessary for us, first of all, not be tired and not be jaded, and then also we need to have lots of patience. According to Master Yu Ming, he says that at the time of relying on a spiritual teacher, if you had not attained realization through practicing meditation, nor through studying, then what you need to do is to rely on a spiritual teacher and study from that teacher. Then, even if one were not to attain liberation in this one lifetime, it would lead to the great insights upon hearing in the next lifetimes. So let it be for the benefit of this lifetime, and for the next lifetime, we need to be very aware of our actions so that we don't break those auspicious connections that we have to our teachers. We need to cherish the spiritual teacher and cherish the connections we have with the spiritual teacher. At the time of relying on the spiritual teacher, sometimes because of the merit, the spiritual teacher would have lots of merit, and some of them would not have lots of merit in their own mind stream. But for those spiritual teachers whom uphold the blessings and the merits within their mind stream, we should definitely be very grateful and cherish that even more, because in such a way we will be able to receive the blessings and benefits of the correct Dharma, and not for anything else. It is not to say that I rely on my spiritual teacher so that my teacher would smile at me, so that my teacher would give me an Amrita pill, so that I would be able to share the wealth of my teacher or the fame or the resources. I think it would be the best when a person were to go to the treasure island to receive the most supreme treasure. If you already went to this treasure island but got something that is a rock instead of a treasure, that is very foolish. The reason that we rely on a teacher is to attain liberation, because each of the different teachers have their different specialties. It is similar to say that in a worldly sense, there are carpenters, and their specialty is carpentry. And there are different teachers who are very good at different things. The ironsmiths are very good at those ironworks and those craftsmanship. So you can seek for those particular type of skill from those teachers. But when you are relying on a spiritual teacher, your goal is to attain liberation. That is what you seek from the spiritual teacher. Other than liberation from samsara, there is nothing else you can gain from the spiritual teacher. If you were to say that, oh, I'm very unhappy. I'm simply relying on the spiritual teacher so that my spiritual teacher can make me happy. Well, that is really not the special skill of this spiritual teacher. You can do other things that makes you happy. For example, food and traveling and all kinds of things that could make you happy. If you were to seek for the spiritual teacher to make you happy, it is simply like you asking the wish-fulfilling treasury, the wish-fulfilling jewel to fulfill your wish to be happy, while the wish-fulfilling jewel can grant so much more than that. That really shows how this person is very foolish, where you are not using the wish-fulfilling jewel at the appropriate place, or you're not relying on the teacher in the appropriate way. That is the same reason, that is the same meaning. Now let's look at why we should be tireless when it comes to relying on the teacher. We need to rely on the spiritual teacher tirelessly, because by doing so we can attain the fruition in this lifetime and future lifetimes. If we can rely on the spiritual teacher with our greatest veneration and greatest happiness to rely on this teacher, during which it would be better for us not to feel rather jaded and tiresome, very exhausted. Sometimes the teacher would create different kinds of tests, and that requires a lot of patience and a lot of veneration towards the teacher. For example, if the teacher notices the student is rather miserly, then the teacher would purposely ask you to make some generous offering for the purpose that you can accumulate merit. If the disciple is rather quite weak and faint-hearted, then the teacher would use various ways to say something negative and say something that is rather unpleasant to your ears, or to slander you, or purposely being unjust. And those are simply tests to see whether the disciple can be patient. Some of the senior teachers of the past, they would purposely scold a student within a large crowd and then would ask that student to leave. At that time, the mind of the self-cherishing mind would right away jump out. And then those great masters, they're very intelligent. At that moment, the teacher would be able to see through you right away. I think I've mentioned this before, since I was very experienced at herding the yaks. I would be able to see through each of the yak's characteristics. Similarly, it applies to people as well. Because nowadays I get in touch with lots of people. Yesterday I got connected to one person maybe for less than half an hour, but I can understand and I can see that person's personality and a character. There are people who told me, well, you definitely won't be able to tell. He was really faking it. He was hiding his true face. But I was able to see their eyes. And you can't fake your eyes. You can fake many things, such as your skin condition, your smile, or fake to be aggressive. But it would be very difficult for people to fake their micro-expressions. I'm not talking about a disciple right now. I'm talking about some authority I got in touch yesterday. Speaking of these is simply to demonstrate that at the time of taming a student, a teacher, though that the teacher does not have any confused body, speech, and mind, they would purposely act certain ways in front of the disciples so that the disciples so that the teacher could make observation, also tame the disciples. For example, if the disciple is rather quite frivolous and loves speaking of those frivolous speech and very distracted usually, then the teacher would purposely sit in front of the disciple with the slouched posture and also conversing with frivolous speech. And if the teacher were to do so, the student may generate wrong view about that teacher, and then right away the teacher would be able to see that the mind of the disciple is rather very unstable. Usually, the supreme spiritual teacher's wisdom are more profound than the ocean and more vast than the space. So, as mundane beings, it's very difficult for us to fathom the teacher's mind. Sometimes the teacher, in order to liberate all kinds of sentient beings, while the bodhicitta and the awareness had never parted without any movement, but all kinds of appearances, all kinds of actions can be carried out. There is a sutra, the Bodhisattva Gocharopaya Visaya Vikuravana Sutra. In that sutra, it says that though without ignorance appear as without wisdom, while the teacher doesn't have any of those ignorance, but he would purposely appear to be someone without wisdom. Though without aggression, the teacher would purposely appear as if he or she doesn't have any compassion, so that the spiritual teacher would be able to benefit sentient beings, and this is called skillful means. These kinds of activities, these kinds of actions are the dance of the great sacred meaning. They're simply a play and a manifestation. Therefore, whenever we notice those kinds of actions of the teacher, we should not generate any wrong views. There are people who made observations of the teacher instead of making observations of their own impure body, speech, and mind. They make the observation of the Vajrasangha as well as the spiritual teacher. In such a way, it definitely would destroy the auspicious connections, which is best not to do, because the manifestation of the teacher sometimes it could be peaceful, sometimes wrathful. In whichever way, the teacher will definitely be wholeheartedly benefit sentient beings. So we should have this pure veneration and rely on this teacher. If we can do that, then we are very hopeful at attaining liberation. Now let's look at another verse. After searching the spiritual teacher, after we have already found the spiritual teacher, at that time, the Mara is indeed very displeased, and the Mara would try his very best to create all kinds of obstacles. There are people who used to have a very smooth life and work, and everything goes very well. But after relied on the spiritual teacher, after received some pith instructions, maybe their initial intention is to to have more of favorable condition in their life, but in contrary, their life started to have lots more of obstacles within, and they couldn't handle it anymore. Right away, they would blame it to the spiritual teacher and even abandon the teacher. At the time of encountering those obstacles, we should not blame onto the spiritual teacher, because usually after receiving some paid instructions and some profound teachings, or encountering a really wonderful spiritual teacher, the Mara would be extremely unhappy and would create all kinds of obstacles to you. It is stated in the sutra, the Prajnaparamita Sutra, where it says that there are 46 types of Mara's activities that includes the conflicts between students and teacher. In the clear realization also talks about the Mara's activities could create obstacles for you on your path of liberation, or create obstacles on your faith, on your devotion. That is true Mara's activity. Mara is not necessarily someone who looks horrifying, who has those sharp teeth and just looks completely terrifying. It is not necessarily that. But at the time of generating wrong view to the teacher, to the Vajrasanga, and to the other companions, or because of your laziness, those are the signs to show that Mara has already created obstacles and it has already worked on you. At the time of when you have already encountered the spiritual teacher or listening to some very profound dharmas, then you need to be very careful. And you would be able to sometimes notice that there are different changes, different obstacles in various aspects of your life. So be prepared for such situations, but at the same time, do not lose your faith. Do not think in such a way that, oh, this teacher doesn't have any blessings. That is why I have so much obstacles right now. Do not have such a wrong view. In this way, the Mara has already won the battle. The Mara will be extremely happy about that. This is the key function of the Mara. That's the profession of the Mara. Whenever it is time for me to give the teaching of a very profound teaching, for example, at the beginning of giving the teaching of the wish-fulfilling treasury, it felt to me personally that even the earth and the ground are about to split open. There's really nothing that you can do about it. I know that there are lots of atheists out there, and they would not acknowledge the Dharma protectors and the power of the Bodhisattvas and the blessings and the obstacles and the Mara's activities and so on. But these kinds of powers and force can definitely influence you, and you can feel it. Lots of bodhisattvas who are extremely diligent, the Maras won't be able to do anything to them. And then there are lots of practitioners who are extremely lazy. The Maras don't need to do anything about them. It is only to us who are not necessarily diligent, and we kept on giving up, and then after a little while being diligent, so we have such kind of back and forth. The Maras sometimes would create difficulties, and this is really the wavering minds of some of the practitioners, and that is at the time when your mind fluctuates. That's the time different kinds of wrong views would happen. So do not retrogress at that point. Some of our fellow Sangha members, it is not that they don't seek the Dharma diligently. Rather, it is the interpersonal relationships that would block them or would make them having this thought of leaving the Sangha. Sometimes they would feel that, oh, I don't want to stay here anymore because because my teacher doesn't like me. So let me just leave here. I used to joke about this before. I have to be very careful with who I look at during a meeting, because if I were to neglect someone not on purpose or didn't look at someone at the meeting, they would feel that I do not think that they're important. And then maybe they would just leave the second day and they would just put down their job and then right away leave Larungar. And it seems to be very easy. If you can leave here so easily, not receiving some profound teachings from here, it would be such a pity. Especially after not receiving the profound teachings, but accumulated a heap of wrong views. On top of that, breaking such kind of connection, that would be definitely very sad. If people have too much of those wrong views, it would be the best for them not to continue to stay here. But for people with faith and with the connections, auspicious connections, as well as faith to Vajrayana, I think it would be the best for you to stay here as long as possible. I've quoted from Lama Ningti, where it says that if you were to have the wrong view towards the Guru and or towards the Dharma, you should be aware of it right away. And then at the time of making such observation, you should contemplate that this is the obscuration, this is the obstacle that is created by Mara. At the time of contemplating in such a way, then the Mara's activity would be weakened right away, just as if a thief were stealing from a household and being caught by the owner of that house. So whenever you were to have any kinds of obstacles, any kinds of things that doesn't go along with the interpersonal relationships or the wrong view and conflicts between disciples and the teacher, you should recognize that this is the activity of the Mara. I need to supplicate to my root guru and I need to make confession. So we need to be very aware of our wrong views. This is such a key instruction. At the time of noticing that we're having the wrong view or under the influence of the Mara, it is just like catching the thief stealing. And then while catching the thief, at that moment the thief would run away. It is the pith instruction that you need to remember. In the wish-fulfilling treasury, it states in the auto commentary, it says that if you were to generate the mind of retrogression or wrong view, you need to understand that this is the activity of the Mara, whom is creating obstacles on the path of mind liberation, and I need to understand that. Whatever kind of appearances that the teacher is displaying, we need to treat it as the wish-fulfilling jewel. A wish-fulfilling jewel is something that nobody would abandon. From the Prajnaparamita Sutra, it says that a wish-fulfilling jewel should be cherished with the mind of joy and great diligence. We need to cherish the teacher and we need to rely on the teacher with great veneration. According to the Great Jewel Heap Sutra, it says that one should not cherish your life that much, because you should uphold your mind that is just like a Vajra. Whenever you question, then you need to ask the questions that would be helpful for you on the path, and do not give up the right faith and the correct meaning. Whenever you ask the teachers, you should ask about the questions about your practice. What is the main obstacle that I am encountering in my practice? What is the question that I have about my practice? What kind of dharma that I need to receive? What kind of practice I need to receive? This would be the best kinds of questions, instead of asking about the teacher's health and various kinds of frivolous things. So this is the teaching about how to rely on the spiritual teacher.